Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Green, and welcome. Today we have author Kirk Sale with us to discuss his new book, The Collapse of 2020, rather timely in its release. Welcome, Kirk.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So let's jump right in. This isn't your first book, but it is, as I said, very timely. So, how did you come to write about the collapse of 2020?
Well, it began 25 years ago. I had written a book about the Luddites, the people in early 19th century England who went around breaking machines that were threatening their livelihoods. It wasn't they were opposed to all machines because they were all weavers and they had complicated weaving machines, but new machines, the steam engines, came in and took their jobs away. So they went around trying to break the new machines. And the whole British government rose up against them and they failed. And so they've come down with a bad reputation. And I wanted to rescue them from that bad reputation. This was in 1995 when the internet, the computer, was just starting to become a dominant force in everybody's lives. And so I wrote sympathetically about them, and I said at the end of that, they resisted the first industrial revolution. We are now in the middle of the second industrial revolution, and there's some of us who want to resist that. And indeed, there were a group of people who called themselves the Neo-Luddites, and my book, when it came out, called Rebels Against the Future, was a kind of Bible to those of us who were resisting the new technology. Well, it was a book that the people in Silicon Valley and their friends in the tech world didn't like. And so ultimately, I got a call from a guy named Kevin Kelly, who was an editor at Wired magazine. He said, "I'd like to come interview you." And I was in New York in my apartment, and I said, "Sure, come anytime." I had never heard of Kevin Kelly, but I figured out who he was and what Wired was, which has never had anything bad to say about technology at any time, anywhere. So he came in and he interviewed me, a kind of hostile interview, what's wrong with technology? And so I showed him what's wrong, and I said, what we're getting to is with machines in charge, and the humans don't actually know how to control the machines so well, and they end up doing things that they do not know how to control. That's the nature of this new technology. And I'm saying that as we are going, in the future, there's going to be a mess with this technology. Because we're doing bad things, but this technology enables us to do bad things faster and better and more efficiently than we'd ever done them before. And that's what's wrong. And he said, "Yeah, what is going to happen?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I think there will be certainly economic collapse. I think the dollar is going to be worthless soon. And I think there will be political collapse, that governments fall apart, wars everywhere, migrants, and certainly ecological collapse. That's bound to happen because we're using up the world's resources at a rate that cannot be replaced, and so soon we won't have any of them." And he said, "Yeah, when do you think that's going to happen?" I was completely taken aback. I mean, I meant in the future. I didn't know when. He said, "Just tell me when." So I said, 2020. Had a nice ophthalmological ring to it, and it seemed far, far away.
Very far away.
I can tell you, in 1995, it was eons away. So I felt pretty safe. So he suddenly slapped out a check, $1,000 check, and slapped it on my desk. He said, "I'll bet you $1,000 it's not going to happen in 2020. what could I do?
Well, here we
$1,000
are.
was a lot of money for me, back then especially. But I figured, well, if I win the bet, $1,000 won't be a lot of money by then, since the dollar is losing its value every year. And if I win the bet, there won't be any money around anyway. So I got out my checkbook and emptied my account and gave him a $1,000 check. We dated it for 2020. And we gave it to a mutual editor that we knew and asked him to keep it for 25 years. And that was the end of it, except that he wrote an article in Wired about the bet. And the idea of it intrigued immense numbers of people. And so online, naturally, there was a website devoted to betting. And this was a prominent bet. Anybody could come in and put their money and on either side. Most of them were on Kevin Kelly's side, but there was some enough on my side. And I don't know actually how that bet has progressed over the years and where it stands now. I should look that up. But I knew that it was something that I had to keep in mind. And then the years go on, And 2 years ago, I said, well, in 2 years is going to be 2020. I should write a book about how close we've come. And if I write this book and the collapse comes on January 1st of 2020, of course, I'll never be able to publish the book, but let's do it anyway. Let's see how close I've come. And so that's the impetus of the book. And I couldn't get a regular publisher to do it because they all said, well, it'll take us a year, maybe a year and a half to publish it. And I said, I'm not going to finish it until December of 2019. So I'd like some. And I finally found a publisher willing to do that. It's a short book. It wasn't hard to assemble. And they put it out in January of 2020. And the question is, I have until December 31st to win the bet.
To win the bet.
Some people, I have a site on Facebook with my name, and there's people on the site saying, you have won the bet already. And that's a little more advanced than I dare to be. And I end the book by saying that I think I have lost the bet, but not by much. Just a little bit past the year that I arbitrarily selected 25 years ago. And here's how bad things are. And the book in 50 pages with full citations in the back. The book says this is how bad we are. We're that far from collapse.
It's interesting because I think that when we take stock of where we are at now in July and where we were at even in March with the lockdowns and things that were starting because of the pandemic. By the way, you didn't know that the pandemic was coming, did you?
I had
and you didn't tell us.
No idea. I do say in the beginning of the book that I anticipated new and unexpected diseases to happen in the future. I didn't expect this one. I didn't know it was going to happen. But the interesting thing is that it has exposed all of the faults that I said were in the system. Economically, for example, this is a huge depression, which only Wall Street doesn't know about. Wall Street has jiggered things so that they can have an economy all on their own that doesn't relate to anything going on in the rest of the world. And that keeps them very happy, and there's few people making a lot of money. But for most people, this is a depression. And when the government stops paying people not to have a job, this is going to be terrible for everybody. I think it's a depression that will be far worse than the one in the 30s, part of which, in fact, I lived in. I was born that long ago. And I remember the effects of the depression and the war that followed. I anticipate something of that economic disaster. We're in it already, but people are trying to print enough money so that we don't know that we're in it. But that can't go on for very long. Even the Democrats can't print money forever.
It does feel as though a veil has been lifted in society right now to really just see what the underbelly of everything actually is,
Yes.
and taking stock of that in such a paramount year with the election just 100 days away. We're really starting to see a call to action that benefits the majority, or at least that is what I hope is actually going to happen, very, very soon, and that we will hopefully make our way out of this together in a way that is helpful for more than for few.
Obviously not. You see this government, the national government, the state governments, they none of them knew how to respond to this pandemic. They had a warning 3-4 years ago that it was coming. Bill Gates is famous for predicting it.
Yep.
But they didn't do anything about it, and then when it came, they didn't know what to do in response. The national government was a joke. It's just bumbled its way throughout this thing, and Congress has no idea what to do except to toss money around, and state governments didn't know what to do. Various ones with various forms of autocracy have been able to cope with this, but of democracy there is nothing left around. And I don't see that this coming election is going to show anything about the value of this democratic system we have, no matter who wins it. And the crisis.
Do you think the people will be able to rise up?
Well, the people are rising up. One of the political predictions that I make, talking about in this book, is the collapse of civil society. With insurrections in many parts of the world. Actually, there are insurrections in 638 places in the world right now, and there are 65 wars in the world. So that's happening while all this pandemic is going on. And in the cities of the United States at this very moment, we see a rising up. With the same ill effects that you would expect of a fomenting a revolution and civil disturbances. Who knows where it's going to end, but Portland can go on for 60 days with people in the streets every damn night. And the government of Portland does not exist. And the people of Portland eventually will tire of this, and I trust them to do something. Trump, of course, is trying to do something, but he's bungling that. He may not even be able to use that as a plank for his fall platform because that's turning out so poorly. It is a collapse of the political system, like I predicted.
And so we're looking ahead, where do you recommend that we go from here?
Well, it depends how severe the collapse is. And the terms I wrote about it in the book suggest that the people who have started a website called Near-Term Human Extinction, those people might be right on the money. And the depth and broadness of the ecological collapse, which just around the corner, may be so broad as to, in fact, make human extinction come about. That may in fact happen. And there are these people. I think there's as many as 10,000 people on this Facebook website who are dealing in one way or another with this prospect of near-term human extinction. And if that happens, then there's nothing we can do about it. I list a variety of ways in the ecological section about how this indeed may come about. I don't go into all of them, like the failure of the 240 nuclear power plants around the world, which all will have to fail and most will explode. I don't deal with that because it's an unimaginable consequence. But so either the future will not exist for us, and we don't have to worry about that, or some few of us may survive, and it would make sense for people who want to prepare for this to establish communities as a way to hunker down together and work together to survive. And communities is how humankind has lived for 2 million years in tribal forms of one kind or another. It's small groups of people working together to survive. And that may be the only way to go. People will need to be self-sufficient in those communities, and national and global systems will have collapsed completely, and nobody sensible could want to restore those systems, the systems that gave us this collapse. So survival, you'd have to take care of a certain amount of tools and a certain amount of food, a certain amount of energy on a very small scale might be done.
It's interesting because, as you say things about the nuclear reactors, and you know, for a lot of people out there, it might border on sort of the science fiction of where we've netted into this apocalyptic sort of territory. Has that been a reaction to the book, or what has been the reaction to the book overall?
It's been divided. As I say on this Facebook page, most of the people have been favorable, and some say, well, you've won your bet. This pandemic shows that you've won your bet. I don't know. We'll see what this mutual editor thinks when we come to December. You could make your claim that way, and there are a few of these pessimistic websites that say that the collapse has already begun. There's no doubt about it, although it hasn't come to its end yet. But we are in the collapse. I don't go so far as to say that, but it seems to me that we can see all of the elements of collapse as they've been exposed by the pandemic. And they would include, actually, pandemics and other kinds of diseases for which we cannot be protected. That seems very likely. I have to tell you that on a personal level, I just moved from a city of 80,000 people in the South, which is now showing a great rise in pandemic cases. I moved from that to an area in upstate New York, outside of a small city, in farmland, where I now have a home near my family, near my son-in-law, near my daughters, not too far away, and in a farmland growing all kinds of crops right now, of the kind that may prove to be essential when systems like supermarkets collapse. So I'm moving myself to an area, if not a community exactly, to an area where survival might be possible for a while.
It's interesting that you say that. My husband and I are going through a similar conversation about our 2.5-year-old twin girls. That it is time we've always been part of the Montessori system of growth and education and trying to teach them their life skills. But it has taken on a new sense of urgency, and our ability to come together as a family and community and finding ways to pool resources between adults and children has become very, very important and urgent. There's a great sense of urgency that I think was perhaps lacking previously in general conversations as we look ahead.
You've got it exactly right. I mean, survival in the best sense is going to happen in small groups of people. Even if the collapse is not as severe as what I suggest, we can see with this pandemic that you're going to have to depend on local people for local needs. What we've seen mostly is that these so-called heroes, they're operating at a local level in hospitals, in communities, and they're the only ones that have enabled the system to continue at all. In other words, the national government, the state governments, have been floundering. I mean, you look at how different states have responded to this. Nobody knows what to do. They're all a mess. And the only thing that's getting done is getting done at the local level. And in terms of teaching, schools, which have always been local, will always have to be local, although the federal government does like to stick its fingers into it, and the state governments like to. But in truth, it cannot be anything but local. And what we're going to have to see then, educating our children now, we will have to do it as a small community working together, grown-ups involved at all levels in order to carry on education, ultimately, which has to be face-to-face. So, but that can only be done at a local level by people who are working out their protections in a way that saves all. But on a larger scale, I think that is the only thing that will get us through these numerous collapses that I write about.
And this is not your only area of expertise. You've written several other books in addition to the collapse of 2020.
Yeah.
What are some of the other subjects that you've covered in those books?
Well, I've written 14 books in all. Subjects range from SDS, the 1960s student group, to Christopher Columbus and Robert Fulton, the inventor of the steamboat, and the Luddites, and I've dealt with the prehistoric people of the kind that were living in tribes. A whole range of different subjects. There is a certain unity to them that I don't know if any scholar out there would be able to perceive, but in my heart I see it. And the first is a drawing in of ecological responsibility. How do we face nature? How do we deal with nature? How do we fit into nature? How do we prevent the ecological collapse that we are creating? And I've done this explicitly in several books and implicitly in others. For example, the Columbus book was about, it was called The Conquest of Paradise. And the images I was trying to convey was of Europeans coming to what could well be called a paradise, which for the Indians was a paradise, different paradises. And what the Europeans did was live out a hatred of nature. They found nature in the wild to be a frightening thing. And so the book deals with how Europeans came to have this attitude toward nature, and when they brought it over to the Americas, what they did with it. And I blame Columbus for that, because he was obviously the first one to do it. And he was the first one to have no comprehension of the nature, the wild that he discovered at all. So that idea of considering what a paradise in nature would be permeates the books at one level or another. And as a second subtext, the idea of decentralization, of small is beautiful, as I put it in Human Scale in 1980, and a revision that I did in 2017, all forms of human enterprise should be at a small scale. A human scale where humans can control and deal with it and understand it, beyond which it gets to be so big that it cannot even cope with its own problems, as we see with the pandemic, exactly. But I have been pushing the idea of community and living in nature, living in your bioregion, as I put it in one book. That's always been a second subtext of these books. So
if you had to look ahead towards the end of the year, I know we've sort of spoken about there's no crystal ball and we don't really know, but we can look to the past and have a reckoning. What do you anticipate the rest of the year will bring in the sort of finite amount of time that we have left in 2020?
That's not fair. I went through these predictions in the book, and they haven't been quite as dire, quite as fast as I don't know about the next 6 months. I do think that these tragedies will continue to be played out. And I say tragedies because a tragedy in Shakespearean terms is when things happen inevitably, even when the hero, the tragic hero, sees that what's going on is going to be awful, or sometimes when he plays out his life and he doesn't know that a tragedy is going to unfold, but a tragedy does unfold. So we are in that tragic position now where we have predicted that the world is coming to an end. I say we have predicted. I would say the large number of people who have given thought to this, as reflected in the United Nations reports every so often about the environment, have predicted collapse within the 21st century, by the end of this century. Some much closer and some like 2020. But everybody is predicting that the way we're going on won't work. And the only question is how soon will it completely not work? So I don't know. My own life is lived with the thought that I have another few years to live, and I'm going to be able to do it surviving on a small scale with my family nearby. And
that sounds like a beautiful future.
Well, I don't know how beautiful it's going to be, frankly. I mean, the kind of uprisings that are happening in the cities right now, if they continue and get widespread, this is going to be quite ugly. And if it turns racial, be much uglier still. So I'm not one to say that this future is necessarily going to be a happy one, but I'm just predicting a way to survive it as best we can.
And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. So author Kirk Sale, thank you so much for being with us today. Please pick up his book. It's available on Amazon, and we will talk to you later.
It's been my pleasure.